Welcome everybody to St. Pete of Florida, which is near Tampa. Here we are at the Southern Management Association conference to present our paper about sustainability of the fast-moving consumer goods products, like obviously water, food, and other items that we tend to consume on a day-to-day basis. We're going to show you some highlights of the presentation so you can benefit from the entire research that was completed in East Asia and accepted at the Southern Management Association conference. Did you know that we're using 25% more resources than our planet can sustain? So we need to be better consumers and obviously use our resources wisely. Another fact is that water scarcity affects about 40% of the people in the world, and it's expected to get worse. Just in the US alone, every year we produce about 243 million tons of solid waste every single year. As a matter of fact, every hour in the US alone, we throw out 2.5 million plastic bottles. That's every hour. Imagine in a 24-hour period, that amounts to about 40 to 50 million plastic bottles that we throw into our oceans, into our canals, into our environment. Obviously, those packages are produced with toxins sometimes, and those toxins drain out into the ground and eventually makes it into our waters, and that pollutes the environment, that pollutes our waters. So as consumers, we need to be more sustainable. Think about those products that we use, because eventually the packaging will end up into our environments and pollute our clean waters. Remember to do your part when it comes to sustainable consumerism. Use the 5 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, renew, and respect the environment in every decision you make as a customer, as a manufacturer, as a leader, and as a role model. Hello, welcome everybody to this session on sustainability of fast-moving consumer goods, managing the environmental impacts of consumption within the fast-moving consumer goods value chain. For those of you who are not familiar with what do we mean by fast-moving consumer goods, these fast-moving consumer goods, which are also known as consumer packaged goods, or products that can be sold quickly and at relatively low cost to consumers on a day-to-day basis. Oftentimes you buy these from convenience stores or your local grocery locations, obviously, that you and I shop at. Examples of the fast-moving consumer goods can include durable goods such as packaged goods like foods, beverages, toiletries, over-the-counter drugs, and obviously other consumable products that can be bought quickly and consumed quickly. The fast-moving consumer goods are really vital for everyday needs. So think about how often you use soap, right? Detergents, basically every day, if not on hourly basis. And then food and water, obviously we consume hour by hour basis. It is great to see that the Southern Management Association and the rest of our colleagues here are actually concerned about obviously the climate change and the reduction of waste. The Department of Defense warned in a report to the U.S. Congress on July 2015 that climate change is one of the most urgent and growing threats to our national security that will aggravate poverty, social tensions, ineffectual leadership, weak political institutions, and threaten the stability around the globe. However, the good news is we can prevent the worsening impact of climate change by reducing it, combating it, stopping it, and adapting our behaviors as consumers. We can start by focusing on sustainability in everything we do on a day-to-day basis. We cannot just say, okay, we need to work on this on the production side. we need to also focus on the consumption side and the behavior of consumers. The Unilever Value Chain organization has done a lot of work, and they mentioned in 2014 that the environmental impact of our own operations continue to reduce, although those associated with the consumer use of their brands are proving much harder to reduce. So that's a statement from the Unilever annual report in 2014, where they're saying 68% of the footprint that obviously is left on the society comes from the consumer side. Unilever's CEO Paul Pullman mentioned that it will take much more than one company or government or community to solve the challenges that face us. We need collective action for a brighter and more sustainable future for all. In most countries, household consumption over the life cycle of the product and services account for more than 60% of all impacts of consumption. We know from previous research also that a doubling of wealth leads to 80% higher CO2 emissions. So population predictions for 2050 make this even worse and more urgent, as stated by the United Nations Environmental Program in 2010. So the fast-moving consumer goods industry is under pressure both from investors or other stakeholders who want a long-term sustainable development, as well as pressure from government through legislation that is specifically aimed at corporations for the purpose of driving down the unacceptable carbon footprints of manufacturing. So a main research question emerges. And this is where we ask, what elements contribute to high environmental impact of consumer use within the fast-moving consumer goods value chain as part of this research? We know from literature that the Earth's surface temperature has risen quickly over the last 100 years. As a matter of fact, temperature increase has doubled in the last 50 years. The burning fossil fuel increases, obviously, greenhouse gases. The cause here, we can look at industrial activities and we can look at human daily routines or habits. More specifically, we know that awareness is not leading to direct sustainable action in terms of consumers' behavior. We need to understand why and what we can do, obviously, to turn this around for the majority of the population. The concept of sustainability obviously has to look at the environment, the social issues, the economic model of them obviously staying profitable. In the meantime, we need to take actions that are bearable, that are viable, that are equitable for all stakeholders concerned. So what do we mean by sustainability? So sustainability is the ability of an organization to effectively and efficiently manage their core economic responsibilities while also proactively respecting the environment and being accountable to their stakeholders in a transparent manner. So we see that there's sustainable production. We also see that there's sustainable consumption. On the sustainable production side, obviously, we tend to avoid permanently depleting the natural resources that we all rely upon. So our production has to take that into consideration. We need to use techniques in raw materials which avoid the use of fossil fuels and palm oils. We need to have effective as well as efficient processes in management towards sustainable production. We need to be focused on corporate social responsibility, and on the sustainable consumption side, we know that it is very highly driven by media. In terms of sustainable consumerism, based on literature, we know that the more sustainable consumers will be more likely from the younger generation, you millennials, and obviously all those people who have been born in the last 15, 16 years, because you learn more of this in school about how to live sustainably. We know that they tend to be females. They tend to be working professionals. Also, they tend to hold a view of personal social responsibility, or what we know as PSR. Majority of the research has focused on sustainable production rather than on consumption. Researchers should consider sustainable consumption as a series of phases or activities rather than a singular event. So we need to consider, obviously, selecting, using, disposing of products, etc. Although concern for the environment is rising among researchers and consumers and obviously managers in corporate environment, sustainable consumption habits are not similarly identified. They are less prominent in literature and in our empirical studies. So there's often an attitude behavior gap, or what we know as cognitive dissonance. Consumer attitudes and behaviors are erratic and somewhat unpredictable towards sustainable consumption. Situational influences, social influences, and even personal influence are all tend to affect human behavior. We have 7 different hypotheses in this study. The first one says that a high percentage of consumers will have an awareness of what global warming is and will know what the disastrous consequences of humanity not addressing it will be. We went through a process of basically doing a qualitative study and then supporting that with quantitative study. This is what we call the triangulation and integration process. Triangulation basically is a cross-verification process which allows a more holistic and more complete and more thorough picture of the research problem findings, and it also tends to facilitate more confidence in the required results because we've had more ways of checking the results and the findings. In terms of the qualitative research, we had 11 focus group participants. They tended to be students of business and English language. All of them were part-time workers or self-employed in their own businesses. So the groups basically were very diverse, and we had 6 males and 5 females. In terms of the quantitative research, we got 212 online survey respondents that completed the questionnaire, 50% male and 50% female, so that was very equal. 76% live in Asia and the remaining lived in Europe. In terms of religion, we had majority Buddhist, and then we had about almost 30% Christians, and then non-religion represented the other 20%, and Islam represented 10% of the participants in the quantitative study. So in the qualitative research, we had good diversity, observation, and interpretation. Obviously was done by the researcher. It was semi-structured discussion where the researcher was fully involved, obviously asking questions and driving the discussion toward sustainability research. And obviously it is going to produce subjective results. On the quantitative research, we had average diversity. Measurement and testing of hypotheses took place based on the data. Either something is significant or not significant, as we do in most of our research at either 95% confidence level or 99% confidence level. It was fully structured format, obviously, where people complete the survey on their own time, at their own pace. However, the researcher is obviously uninvolved because the questionnaires were mailed to people using email or social media websites. And the results tend to be a little bit more objective simply because we're looking at data. In terms of the first hypothesis, talking about awareness of global warming, it was supported. A high percentage of consumers, about 87%, do have an awareness of what global warming is. 84.9% of consumers know the disastrous consequences of global warming if humanity is not addressing it. So that's our findings for hypothesis number 1. For hypothesis number 2, the value chain and segmental impacts, 98 respondents suggested that the highest greenhouse gases impacts within the fast-moving consumer goods value chain would emanate from the manufacturing environment, and obviously they're ignoring the consumption side. So neither the qualitative focus group discussion nor the quantitative survey participants identified that consumer use. The result supports our statement that consumers will be unaware of the size of their environmental impact within the fast-moving consumer goods value chain. For hypothesis number 3, responsibility for sustainability, a total of 143 respondents stated that the responsibility for fast-moving consumer goods sustainability should be shared between the producers or manufacturers as well as consumers. So as a result, the qualitative focus group discussion and quantitative survey, both of them seem to indicate that a larger number of consumers will agree that fast-moving consumer goods manufacturers should bear the biggest responsibility for sustainability efforts in these products. However, it is not fully supported by the research. For hypothesis number 3, a total of 146 respondents, which is basically about 69% of our respondents in the survey, stated that they either agreed or strongly agreed that the manufacturer should design in more sustainable manner all the products that we tend to consume. For hypothesis number 4, which deals with relationship and personal social responsibility and sustainable consumption, we see that this hypothesis is rejected. Again, it's stated that an awareness of personal social responsibility towards people and planet will have a positive impact on sustainable consumption. Respondents who feel higher sense of personal social responsibility also consume more sustainably. In hypothesis number 4, we find that respondents who feel a higher sense of personal social responsibility also consume more sustainably. On the other hand, those who feel a lower sense of personal social responsibility tend to consume less sustainably. For hypothesis number 6, respondents who feel more highly influenced by sustainability positive situational factors when purchasing fast-moving consumer goods consume more sustainably. And those who feel a lower sense of being influenced by sustainability positive situational factors when purchasing fast-moving consumer goods products tend to consume less sustainably. For hypothesis number 7, we find that respondents who feel more inclined to ignore fast-moving consumer goods recommendations, instructions, consume less sustainably, and those who feel less inclined to ignore fast-moving consumer goods instructions and recommendations consume more sustainably. In terms of hypothesis number 5, which dealt with demographics such as age, gender, employment, education, we find that younger generations, those who are less than 35 years of age, tend to be more sustainable. So this is very similar to previous studies. We also found that females tend to be more sustainable in our study. What is interesting is that we found those with a bachelor degree or college educated tend to have the highest mean for sustainability compared to all the other groups. What is contrary to previous research studies is that we found that those who were unemployed adults tend to have a higher mean average for being sustainable consumers. Those who hold a view of personal social responsibility also seem to be more sustainable consumers. In this study between Asians and Europeans, we find that Asians tend to have a higher mean average on sustainability behaviors. Also, another interesting finding is that those earning less than $35,000 annually tend to have a higher mean average on sustainability mindset compared to all the other categories. In terms of religion, in this case, the majority of our respondents were Buddhists. We find that Buddhists seem to have a higher level of sustainability mindset and consciousness compared to the other categories in this study. In terms of discussion, we have confirmation in this research that global warming phenomena is widely known and understood. However, the causes of global warming are much less understood by consumers. The effects of burning fossil fuels are not readily comprehended by the fast-moving consumer goods consumer. Whilst a majority of the respondents feel that fast-moving consumer goods are vital for human health and hygiene, the connection between behavior in the home and greenhouse gas effects is fairly weak. The concept of value chain is not understood well by the consumers. The concept is more related to the analysis of business by managers and leaders than it is to the public domain. What is interesting is that when measuring and reporting greenhouse gases emissions across the life cycle of fast-moving consumer goods products, both the fast-moving consumer goods companies in the United Nations tend to use the value chain concept to report their figures. Only 15% of respondents correctly identified consumerism to be the main contributor to the fast-moving consumer goods greenhouse gases. About 67% of consumers are willing to take a joint responsibility effort for sustainability efforts with the producers of these products. There is an attitude behavior gap in consumerism because 65% of respondents claim that they display cognitive dissonance. In other words, they know what the right thing is, but they don't always do it. So we know that recycling is helpful for the environment, but we don't always go to that extra effort to recycle. The gap between attitude and behavior may possibly be narrowed or widened depending on positive or negative influential factors that consumers face on a day-to-day basis when they're making decisions regarding their products and product usage. There is a reduction in overall sustainable consumption means for those respondents who reported loose attitudes to the fast-moving consumer good labeling. So what are some recommendations for today's managers and leaders? They should consider active involvement of the consumer in the design, production, and marketing of new sustainable products. The consumer mindset is more focused on the short-term benefit of the fast-moving consumer goods products. So we need to promote the short-term benefits of most sustainably developed products that will intrinsically help and positively impact the long-term sustainable development strategies and goals for the business or the organization. Value creation should be the focus for everyone throughout the value chain. We need to consider the effects of decision making both internally as well as externally. So we need to focus on the production side as well as on the consumption side of these fast-moving consumer goods products. There are some limitations, obviously, and we do have some recommendations for future researchers. We recommend a sample size of 500 to 1,000, and also to include people from all the continents to see their consumption habits. Older generations and higher income earners are good opportunities for future research. A more balanced range of income might be useful for establishing whether or not income is related to sustainable consumption. A deeper look into the point of sale influential factors is certainly a future research opportunity. Southeast Asians and white Europeans made up majority of the response in this study. We need to include obviously more segments of the population in future studies. Overall, in summary, let us say that fast-moving consumer goods are vital for human health and hygiene. Their role in consumption is also a huge contributor toward the profits and sustainability of modern businesses, be they small or large organizations. Sustainability and sustainable development is in economic imperative for all managers and leaders in a 21st century environment. There is some good news on the horizon. It does appear from this research that members of the younger generations are adopting more sustainability-oriented lifestyles and behaviors. So the older generation perhaps can learn from those younger members of our society. Managers and leaders perhaps could be tapping into this young mindset in the short term, which will no doubt yield positive long-term sustainability benefits for humanity and planet Earth. We only have one planet. We need to keep it clean and we need to keep it green. The way forward is that we need to educate students, consumers, and obviously the workforce on the necessity and benefits of sustainability. There's a Cree Indian proverb that says, only when the last tree has died and the last river been poisoned and the last fish been caught will we realize we cannot eat money. We need to be sustainable. You and I, as consumers, need to start with our day-to-day habits on a regular basis by operationalizing the 5 R's in every part of our work and consumption. We need to reduce, reuse, recycle, renew, and respect the environment. Thank you very much for watching this presentation, which comes to you from St. Pete of Florida in the beautiful Sunshine State at the Southern Management Association Conference in October 2017. Be sustainable, think sustainably, and obviously use the 5 R's. Reduce, reuse, recycle, renew, and respect the environment. Well, here we are at the Guy Harvey fish tank area where you can see some fish. If we put a lot of plastic and toxins into the water, obviously the fish here suffer. Good luck being more sustainably oriented individual and consumer.